Hey everyone! It's been a minute since I made a video on tarot, and I thought that I would check back in and have a little chat because I have been playing around with decks a bit more in the past kind of 6 months to a year, maybe 9 months to a year, and my thoughts have been going back and forth on how I want to use them, how I want to work with the different decks that I own, and I felt like it was time to maybe talk about that again on the channel and get that conversation going. And I feel like my ideas have changed very recently a little bit again. Like I've been moving in a direction that I think I've been on and off moving towards over the years. So in case you're really confused, in case you've never watched a video that I've made before about tarot, I have a pretty relatively skeptical understanding of tarot in terms of your average tarot reader. So there are tarot readers out there who understand the cards to be able to tell the future, and that they are kind of spiritual tools that can be used to give kind of advice from spirit or from the divine, and that kind of they are offering some sort of hard truth, so to speak. I feel like I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum from those people, and that's not to say that I don't respect that belief, it's just not a belief that I hold. So I'm on way over on the other end of the spectrum where I basically believe that the cards that we pick are random, that when we deal cards that they are random, and that the messages and the kind of patterns that we see in a tarot spread when we draw tarot cards, the kind of the interpretation that we come up with, that it is something like a Rorschach test, that we are kind of seeing a random pattern, but it's a random pattern full of like really rich symbolism, and that we are drawing out some kind of story intuitively from what we are seeing in those cards. So from that description, you're probably already seeing that it's potentially problematic for me to be reading for other people. Because if you believe that you can kind of tune into spirit and tune into your intuition and offer somebody an interpretation of cards that have been specifically drawn, for them through some sort of magical spiritual means, you can see how it's very valuable for a reader to be offering that service to another person, right? Because you're offering them a message coming through you, through your intuition, coming from spirit to that other person, right? Whereas for somebody, for me, who doesn't believe that that's actually what's happening when you draw tarot cards, it makes it a little bit more complicated. It means that essentially the problem that I've come back to again and again when it comes to reading cards for other people is that I do feel like they're random, and I do feel like the messages that I'm coming up with and the story that I'm coming up with is very much my own. It's very much just coming from me. And I don't know how I feel about kind of offering another person my interpretation of a random set of cards and my kind of just a story that I've created, I suppose, out of these sort of inspiring images, and giving it to them with some sort of weight of authority. That just doesn't quite sit right with me, and I go through phases of feeling like as long as I make it clear to the other person where I stand and how I believe the cards to work, and that this is just a kind of a springboard for them and to get them thinking in a new way about their problem, about their situation, and to kind of, give them kind of new concepts to work with, that as long as the other person understands that, and that they understand that I don't believe that I'm speaking with any authority, that I'm channeling anything, that I'm telling them any kind of, ultimate truth or anything like that, that then it's kind of okay for me, ethically speaking, to offer other people readings. And I've talked about this before. I made a video on this before, which I'll link up in the linky thing up there if you click on the top right hand corner. I have talked about that before, and I eventually came to the conclusion that I would no longer give readings to other people. I do go back and forth on that, and I have made other videos in the past where I have talked about the value of storytelling and the value of somebody constructing this alternate story. Like I say, that sometimes somebody giving you a perspective on a situation, it makes you think about something in a new way, right? Because if I'm answering your question through a random set of images and symbols and putting together my own spin on those cards, on those kind of random cards that I've drawn, I'm definitely offering you something that is completely separate to anything, any kind of way that you might have been thinking about the situation. Hopefully, anyway, it's giving you kind of a fresh perspective. Ultimately though, what I keep coming back to is that decision that I made to stop reading for other people. It's not a hard and fast thing for me. I went through a phase recently where I started up an Instagram feed, on specifically an Instagram page for tarot, because I wanted to separate it slightly from Anya Orga, and I was posting pictures and offering kind of definitions on the cards, kind of pulling two cards and doing an interpretation. And I enjoyed doing that, and I liked doing that, and that felt fine, because I wasn't suggesting through those interpretations of the cards that I was offering one individual a kind of ultimate answer to a specific problem. It was more, you know, these are two cards and this is an inspirational message that you could take from these cards. And that felt good to me, that felt fine. But the reason for me working on that Instagram page was to move towards ultimately giving readings again, offering readings, selling readings to individual clients. And ultimately, even though I told myself like it's fine as long as people understand where I'm coming from, then it's ethically okay, the conclusion that I kept coming to again and again was, I don't know if it sits right with me. I don't know if it feels quite right. So I would say that for now, unfortunately, I think that I have come back to the same conclusion again and again that I came to many years ago, where giving readings one-on-one to clients with tarot cards, especially like via email or, I don't know, in a very sort of offering you just a complete whole of a reading without any back and forth, for me right now doesn't feel quite right. I do enjoy giving readings in person though, and that's something that I'll maybe touch on briefly in this video. One thing that I did start doing more in the past kind of 12 months was actually giving my friends readings a little bit more, meeting people for coffee, you know, drawing some cards, and that felt a lot more, that feels a lot better to me, because the person is there with me and they have the opportunity to talk back and forth. So we have the opportunity to explore the cards together. I have the opportunity to explain to them what the symbolism of the card means, and to get their thoughts on how it might relate to their situation. And we can kind of have this exploratory conversation together and try and figure out, well, what might this card kind of suggest to you to explore in your life relating to this conversation. I do want to add a quick caveat, which is that when I talk about the ethical problems that I have with reading tarot for people in this way, and you know, the problem with kind of offering like a whole reading, like a whole just finalized interpretation of a spread, and just kind of offering it to them, you know, as the completed reading without having any back and forth. I'm really just talking about from my own perspective. I have no ethical problem with other people doing that, because other people are often coming up from a place where they believe that something slightly different is happening than what I believe. So they might believe that in some concept of personal intuition, that they can kind of tap into or tune into the other person's energies and what the other person might need to hear in the moment, or that they're channeling spirit in some way. And I've absolutely no problem with that. I've had readings from people in the past who have more of that kind of understanding of how the tarot works, and I have found great value in it, and I would never denigrate that kind of practice. I just, for me, when it comes to me doing that for clients, especially for money, that's when it starts to feel a little bit uncomfortable for me, because my understanding of what's actually happening is slightly different. But a problem that I kept running up against, even in person, doing readings for friends in person, was something that I really kind of want to talk about in this video. And it is the tendency that I find in myself anyway, especially when reading for others, to talk about the cards as though they are offering a kind of ultimate truth, and as though they are offering an answer to a question, as though the cards that have been drawn are not random, and that they are offering kind of, yeah, like an actual answer to the question asked. And I think to some degree that can work, and you know, there can be this certain level of suspension of disbelief, and I think I told myself that for a long time, and that was my kind of means of reading them for other people. I always tell people what my understanding is of the cards when I go, you know, when I start to read for them, so they know going in that, you know, there is a level of suspension of disbelief happening. But the main issue I wanted to talk about in this video about tarot is the question of whether I choose to suspend my disbelief and act as though the cards are giving a kind of ultimate answer or not. Because I found that even when giving readings in person to people who I, talk to beforehand about my understandings of how tarot works and how it doesn't, and told them, openly about my belief that the cards are random and that I'm just kind of projecting my own intuitive storylines onto these cards, and that really all that's coming across is my own opinions through this symbolism, I would still find myself, when reading those cards, when we actually got into the reading itself, I would still find myself treating them as though the cards were not random, as though they were kind of an ultimate truth. And I think it's partly because this is an easier way to read tarot. The easiest way, and the way that we kind of learn initially, maybe, often, depending on what books we pick up, but the way that we kind of start to learn tarot is through this very traditional way of understanding, interpreting the cards, where they are kind of predicting the future in some way, that they are a fortune telling, they are traditionally seen, traditionally within the kind of occult sphere, seen as a fortune telling tool. And the way that we kind of learn to use them often leads us into that kind of tendency to suspend our disbelief, even if we don't believe in divination, that we may suspend our disbelief and sort of act as though they are offering us some snapshot of the future or of the present, or some snapshot of the truth. And this is something that I found, especially in person, when reading for other people, very, very difficult to move away from. Even though I kept telling myself that I would like to move away from that model and start trying to develop my own kind of model of reading the cards, which would be a lot more exploratory, a lot more kind of back and forth with the other person, and a lot more sort of just using the reading setting as an opportunity to explain the symbolism of the cards to the other person and ask them lots of questions about, like, let's say that the Emperor comes up and I explain to them, well, this card relates to authority and kind of the masculine and potentially father figures and kind of control and action and, being in control of the material realm and so on and so forth, whatever different ways that you might want to go with that card. I really liked the idea of being able to sort of maybe intuitively pick which aspects of the card to express to the querent, but then give them a lot of room to kind of answer questions and explore that themselves and say, well, okay, yeah, how do I want to jump off that point and continue? And then to use the session almost more as a kind of a counselling session than a kind of me giving the querent the answers that the cards are telling. And I think that one of the problems that I was having was that it comes down to using spreads and using specific positions with spreads. I very much learned how to create a tarot spread through a kind of system of thinking about what the overall question might be and then breaking that question down into 5, 6, 8 different segments, and that the card then that is drawn for that particular position kind of answers that specific question. So for example, you might have a question just kind of generally about career direction, and then the individual positions might address things like what are your blockages against your progression, what might be your advice for moving forward or moving past those blockages, and what might be your strengths in your current career situation, what are your weaknesses, and so on. And I think for some reason that having those specific positions, they make the reading easier, but I think also potentially they lead me down the road a little bit too much of saying, well, this is the question that we're asking around this situation and this is the answer. And I really want to move away from that. So yeah, I do want to sit down over the next couple of weeks and start thinking about how can I put together spreads and start exploring different types of spreads that might move away from that model and that might maybe ask questions rather than giving answers, so that the card, rather than providing an answer, actually asks a question. And I feel like if I was able to come up with this different way of doing a spread, if I was able to have spread positions that were asking questions or prompting the cards to ask questions rather than prompting them to give answers. That might really help me down the line, maybe to be able to read for other people. And I don't want to close the door on that possibility completely. But for now, I think I'm really just focusing on reading for myself. And I think I would like to start maybe talking to you again about reading tarot specifically for yourself. Because I feel like almost all of the resources that I've ever read or watched or come across about learning tarot, learning how to read tarot, is really aimed at ultimately learning how to read for other people. And I have just felt a certain amount of frustration in that because first and foremost, at least, I want to use the tarot for myself. I know there are people out there who believe that you shouldn't read tarot for yourself because you're kind of muddying the answers or whatever, but because I'm, over here on the spectrum of like how you believe tarot works, that makes no sense to me. Like, to me, the best person in the world to read your own tarot cards is you, because you have full access to, what's going on in your situation. So yeah, I'm really wanting to spend some time looking at those kind of alternative spread ideas and thinking about new ways that I can use tarot. I've definitely talked about this on and off on the channel, and I feel like I have so far failed, maybe because I haven't consistently tried enough. I have recently also been exploring trying to use tarot in a more kind of spiritual way, in a sense that's more connected to my spiritual practice, and that's been really interesting to me too. I'm really looking forward to trying to use the cards to explore my own beliefs, to explore different symbolism that I can use in my practice and things like that. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I have been doing some spreads for myself, but I feel like I haven't really cracked the code yet. I haven't really started to see those ways that I can use the tarot that's a little bit different. I really want to put my own stamp on it. I feel like I have felt this for many, many, many years. Like, I could definitely find my own slightly different way of reading cards, of reading the tarot that would feel more authentic to me, and that would help me read the cards in a way for myself that would be more productive and more helpful and more exciting. So I think some of the things I'm going to be focusing on going forward are, first of all, I want to think about spreads. I want to think about how can I construct a tarot spread that is not your standard model, that is a little bit different, and it's going to kind of encourage me to use them in a different way and to interpret their meanings in a different way and to, like I say, ask questions rather than give answers. And second of all, I want to maybe start thinking about, laying out maybe slightly different keywords for all of the cards. I'm thinking about what kinds of words I can use that will help me interpret the cards in that slightly different way, that is just going to feel more authentic to me and be more useful for the kind of, tarot skeptic. And yeah, so I'm really hoping that going forward this might be helpful for any of my fellow tarot skeptics out there, any of you who have a similar worldview to me, but also just really love these cards or are interested in them, and just feel like there's something there that you can really mine and get into, but that you're sort of not quite managing to to really dig your way into it. So yeah. Thanks as always for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments down below as always. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you actually see my videos when they're posted, because you won't always actually see my videos in your subscription feed, unfortunately, these days, unless you actually hit the notification bell. So yeah, thanks a million for watching, and I will talk to you again soon.